The town of Hamilton in South Lanarkshire lies 12 miles from Glasgow and takes its name from one of Scotland's most powerful families. Today, little of the Hamilton grandeur remains. The only clue to their greatness lies in the mausoleum built to house the remains of the Dukes of Hamilton and their families. The Hamiltons first emerged as a force during the Wars of Independence, when Sir Walter Fitzgilbert, the first historically confirmed Hamilton progenitor, governed Bothwell Castle on behalf of the English. But Sir Walter swapped sides and was rewarded when Robert the Bruce gave him land, which included the barony and lands of Cadzow, which later became the town of Hamilton. But it took almost 250 years for the Hamiltons to secure a position of power. This happened in 1474 when James, the first Lord Hamilton, married King James II's daughter, Princess Mary Stuart. His grandson, the second Earl of Arran, was heir to the throne through his connections with both James IV and Mary, Queen of Scots. He became Regent of Scotland while Mary was still a child and later proposed that she should marry his son. But as others were to find out later, Mary had other ideas and married French royalty instead. And in coming years, Hamilton allegiance to the House of Stuart brought frustration and hardship that bordered on ruin. The lowest ebb came when the first and second Dukes of Hamilton were killed during the Civil War and Cromwell seized the family estates. But the first Duke's daughter, Anne, paid off the family debts, restored their fortunes and transformed a 13th century tower house into Hamilton Palace. Single-handed, she achieved stability and laid the foundations of future wealth. And when Alexander X Duke inherited the title in 1819, he set about enlarging Hamilton Palace by making it more opulent and commissioned a suitable resting place for himself and his descendants. The Hamilton family had invested in coal mining, and now the same mine workings that were a source of Hamilton wealth threatened the very foundations of the family and everything they stood for. Hamilton Palace, one of the grandest houses in Britain, was demolished in 1927 because of subsidence caused by mine workings. And flooding from the River Clyde caused the bodies of the 10th Duke and the 17 relatives who were buried in the crypt beneath him to be taken from the mausoleum and reburied in a local cemetery. Culzean Castle near Maybole in Ayrshire is said to be one of the most haunted buildings in Scotland. Since 1987, the castle's illustration has featured on the back of a Royal Bank of Scotland £5 note. But the place itself is said to be inhabited by at least 7 ghosts, including a servant girl and, of course, a piper. Culzean Castle was designed by Robert Adam and built on the site of the former seat of Clan Kennedy. The Kennedys dominated Carrick and Ayrshire for centuries and are thought to be descended from the Celtic lords of Galloway. They supported Robert the Bruce in the Wars of Independence, and in 1372, Bruce's son, Robert II, appointed John Kennedy Baillie of Carrick. In 1457, his descendant, Gilbert, was created Lord Kennedy. Gilbert's younger brother, James, was Bishop of St Andrews and founded St Salvator's, the oldest building at Scotland's first university. James IV created the third Lord Kennedy, Earl of Cassilis, in 1509, and 4 years later, the King and his Lord were among the 10,000 Scots killed at Flodden. But the Kennedys maintained their Stuart connection. Lord Kennedy's great-grandson, Gilbert, the 4th Earl of Cassilis, was also an advisor to Mary, Queen of Scots, and hosted her visit to Carrick in 1563. And it was Gilbert's daughter Jane who tied the handkerchief round the Queen's eyes before she knelt to be beheaded at Fotheringay on the Wednesday morning of February the 8th, 1587. But it's John Kennedy, the 6th Earl of Cassilis, who has the surest place in Scottish folklore. Described as being grave and solemn, he was a Covenanter, a staunch Presbyterian, and for 2 years was Lord Justice General of Scotland. His wife was Lady Jean Hamilton, heroine of the Gypsy Laddie. The ballad is known as the Gypsy Rover or the Raggle-Taggle Gypsies, and versions have been collected in every part of the English-speaking world. Lady Jean eloped with her gypsy lover. Her husband and his men caught up with the party, and Johnny Fa and 15 of his followers were hung in front of Lady Jean, who was incarcerated for the rest of her life. And though they share a common name, the Scots Kennedys should not be confused with the Irish Kennedys, who are a royal dynasty founded in the Middle Ages by a nephew of High King Brian Boru. The Irish Kennedys are mainly from County Wexford and ancestors to John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 35th President of the United States of America. When it comes to Clan Macgregor, finding the truth can be a difficult business, for the MacGregors were both legendary outlaws, known as Children of the Mist, and victims of state oppression, meted out by their bitter rivals, Clan Campbell. There was a time when the name MacGregor determined if you lived or died. In the 17th century, the MacGregors were targets for a hatred that spawned extraordinary cruelty. The Campbells were said to breed black dogs, the Coineach, to hunt down MacGregors. These great beasts were supposed to be nurtured on the milk of suckling MacGregor women so they could better track their victims. The MacGregors fought the Campbells for decades and were eventually dispossessed of all their lands. The clan who claimed "royal is my race" became little more than outlaws in a pretty lawless part of the world. And the perfect opportunity for the Campbells to get government backing came when the MacGregors murdered 140 Cahoons and a party of schoolboys who came to watch at the Battle of Glenfruin in 1603. King James VI was so appalled he outlawed the clan. Under the prescriptive acts of Clan Macgregor, the name was altogether abolished, and bearing the MacGregor name was punishable by death. MacGregors were ordered to take different names, which were usually assigned. They were denied food, water and shelter, couldn't travel in groups of more than two, and couldn't cut their meat with a blade. MacGregor women were branded and whipped through the streets, and MacGregor women and children were sold into slavery for Britain's new colonies in America. But worse than that, MacGregor heads could be sold to the government as pardon for thievery and murder. And the most famous MacGregor of all, Rob Roy, was forced to take his mother's name and lived at least some of his life as a Campbell. The persecution of Clan Macgregor finally ended in 1774, when the proscription against them was repealed, 171 years after the Act was passed. Eilean Donan Castle on the shores of Loch Duich is one of Scotland's most immediately recognisable landmarks. And it's here that the Mackenzie clan settled at the end of the 13th century. By the 17th century, the Mackenzies were one of the most powerful clans in the Highlands, and their power came from successive royal patrons. The remoteness of the Highlands meant they were effectively beyond the law. They were far removed from the centre of government in Edinburgh, and it took days for Highland news to reach the capital. The king was forced to use clans with local knowledge and manpower to assert their authority, and the Mackenzies effectively became royal agents in the north. The Highlanders and their behaviour embarrassed James VI. He hated Gaelic culture, found the language barbaric and their behaviour worse. And the more distant they were, the more trouble they caused, which meant the MacLeods on the island of Lewis were almost ungovernable. James had tried to colonise Lewis with Lowlanders, who were allowed to use whatever means were necessary to bring the MacLeods to heel, including slaughter, mutilation and fire-raising. And when that failed, he brought in the Mackenzies. Centuries of royal patronage delivered an empire that stretched from the east coast of Scotland to the Hebrides, but loyalty to the Stuarts cost the Mackenzies their lands and titles after the first Jacobite rebellion in 1715. In April 1719, an advance party of 300 Spaniards occupied Eilean Donan in an abortive attempt at rebellion. The Highlanders did not join them, and the main Spanish force never arrived. But 3 Royal Navy frigates arrived, and when their flag of truce was fired on, they pounded Eilean Donan for 2 days and finished the job with some leftover gunpowder. The castle was ruined, and that was how it stayed for 200 years. It took 13 years to rebuild Eilean Donan, and today it's one of Scotland's most popular tourist attractions. It has appeared in films and joins Edinburgh Castle and Balmoral on the list of Scottish icon buildings.